Jennifer Lee Walter, maiden name Britton, born in Springfield, Missouri. I grew up mostly in Springfield, Missouri. My dad worked for National Cash Register Company, so we transferred a lot. My upbringing was like a military brat. We moved around a lot. I worked part-time at Iowa Beef Processors as a receptionist switchboard operator after school. The 185th had F-100s, and they would fly in formation and circle around to land at the airport right above IBP. So I got to see the jets and was intrigued by those. And the person who trained me, and I worked part of a shift with her, her husband was a technician with the 185th in vehicle maintenance. So she filled me in on the Air Guard. Recruiters came to school, but they were active duty recruiters. I don't really remember a Guard recruiter. And I ended up being engaged to a guy in Kansas, Topeka. So Sioux City and 185th did all of my enlistment paperwork, and then I drove down to the Topeka Air Guard and swore in down there. I joined the Kansas Air Guard right out of high school. I had to have been 74 because I went to basic in February of 75. Well, at that time, I had aspirations to be an air traffic controller, and air operations specialist was the closest thing I could get. I didn't want to be in an office and be a typist, and without training or college, that was pretty much where I probably would have ended up. And I thought travel sounded wonderful, and was gung-ho on this whole air traffic control thing. My parents were both pilots, private pilots, so aviation was kind of in our family, and so Air Guard was just it. I ended up getting hired on full-time with the Air Guard and pursued that instead. My brother was in the Air Force, but I didn't know anybody my own age that had done this, so I had absolutely no expectations one way or another, so it didn't really seem odd. It was kind of the way things were back then anyway. There were distinct differences between basic training for a guy and basic training for a girl. The confidence course wasn't something that we were allowed to do. We didn't shoot. The curriculum, I think, other than makeup classes and manners and things like that, were very similar, but it was so new, I think, for women. They didn't quite want us to do some of the physical things that the guys got to do. The percentage of women allowed in the military changed. It was, I think, a little slower to get into the Guard, but I'm thinking around 73, 74 were those changes. And I think the percentage went to like 10%, but it was a congressional threshold on how many women could be in. I went right back to Forbes, Topeka, Kansas, and did my OJT, filing flight plans, and learned about the airfield, a lot of airfield management duties, so runway checks, and learned how to talk properly on the radio and the phonetic alphabet, a little bit about weather. I had to sit at a console in case somebody radioed in, but they'd give me extra work. And I got to learn a lot outside of my little job too, because I had a lot of time during the day. So I had a great supervisor, Sergeant Farmer was his name, and he trained me on a lot of other things. So when I got to Des Moines, I felt equipped. I came up to visit the 132nd because I found out there was a Guard unit here, and loved it. So that kind of sealed the deal. There was really no reason for me to stay at Topeka. It was the same job, except it was busy because there was fighters and they take off and land all day long. So it was busy, and I loved it. I was really fortunate when I transferred to the 132nd. Sherry Sitz. She had just headed off to basic, and she had the full-time clerk typist position in ops, and that's whose position I filled. So when she returned from school, I worked at the Des Moines Register, and then shortly after that, a full-time air ops specialist job came open at the 132nd. I got hired. My initial enlistment was 6 years, and when I transferred to Iowa, they made me re-enlist for another 6, and I can remember freaking out about that, because it's like, no, not another, you know, I already done a year, and they explained to me that really, at that time anyway, our enlistment wasn't hardly worth the paper it was written on. We could walk anytime we wanted. So I initially thought, obviously, that I wasn't gonna, you know, want to stay beyond the 6, but somewhere in there, it was for me. I absolutely loved it. Well, our oldest son's serving in the Guard, so he's all about that. My husband's brother retired from the Air Force. My brother retired from the Air Force. My father served in Korea. Bud's father served in World War II. I had some great mentors. There was still a lot of bias, I'll put it, where, you know, I started out there as a clerk typist just for, it's the lowest pay grade in the wing. And that was where some people thought women belonged. And even breaking out of the administrative career field on the military side was pretty foreign to a lot of people. As we proved ourselves that we could do the job, a lot of those guys, those biases went away. Some, though, didn't. And it was all about pay, you know, like, no girl's going to make, you know, she'll be taking a job away from a guy with a family, that type of attitude. That was there. But it wasn't too long that where I was working at the Air Guard that I had officers encouraging me to go to college. And I got better jobs and more responsibility and military promotions. And Colonel McElhan retired, was probably the biggest mentor for me. Plus, he was a huge supporter of women in the military. And he went out of his way to advise and mentor. He gave me an opportunity, and he ended up being off and on my commander through a large part of my career. And I owe him a lot, because some things I wasn't gung-ho about doing, but he would be very persistent that I should. You know, I spent most of my career trying to blend. And, you know, as made 06 and then general officer, Colonel McElhan was again the one to remind me, this isn't about me. It's you know, an example for all of our airmen and specifically for the females. Mm-hmm. And that helped, because I just want to fit. I didn't want to ever get anything because I was a woman. And then that diminishes what you've achieved, because you feel like people don't think you earned it or you deserve it. And making colonel was such a huge achievement. I felt it wasn't a girl-guy thing at all. Well, I work hard. I think initially that was how I was able to get other opportunities. And I think a lot of times women and maybe even minorities feel like they have to do more. That was definitely me. Well, I do think there are differences between men and women. And I think we have qualities that complement men's qualities. And I think any organization that doesn't have women somewhere in that decision-making process is missing out big time, because we look at things differently. And there hasn't ever been a place that I haven't loved being there. Panama, I loved Kuwait, I loved Afghanistan. I have not been somewhere that I wouldn't want to go back. In 2007, I did a 6-month in Afghanistan, which was a couple months, 3 months longer than any Air Guard or Air Force units were doing at the time. I had an exciting job. It was 755th Air Expeditionary Wing Group, excuse me, and we had about 1,400 airmen who were all working for the Army in Afghanistan. And I can't remember now how many locations, but I want to say 26 different locations around the country, and we visited every single one of them. We had administrative control of these airmen. So right out of the chute, male or female, the Air Force side of it was really not well received because they are integrated into an Army organization, and anytime we had to say, that did not go over well. It wouldn't have mattered if I was purple. Guardsmen, female, and Air Force was always a brick wall to bust through. You know, you second guess yourself a lot when things don't turn out the way that you had hoped. So I did the best I could, but I know I took care of the airmen, and that was the primary mission for us. I don't think women today, young women today, feel like they have any limitations. So that part's off the table. For all the Iowa Guard, Army, or Air, you've seen 3 women general officers, so that ought to be certainly in everybody's goal if that's what they want to do with their life. It's there and it's achievable. Well, for those considering get in, I wish more women would even put it on their list of consideration. I think we still have more opportunity than in any other career field that I can think of. And it's rewarding, and you get to meet a lot of great people. So, yeah, I'd say go for it.